So we talked about the chain of command outside of our organization. Let's talk about the chain of command inside our organization. Before you get there as the forensics investigator, you have to say, really, this evidence needs to be protected. It is it's possible that it could get stomped on, but please protect it as best you possibly can. It's going to be stomped on before you get there. A classic example of this is the help desk calls up, the end user calls up the help desk and says, I need help. And the question is, have you rebooted your computer? Now, the end user, knowing that they're going to call the help desk and ask them for a reboot, they reboot their computer beforehand. So if there was evidence there, now it's been washed away out of RAM. What's nice about attackers is when they say, hey, I'm going to get washed out of the RAM and I know that that's going to happen, I'm going to reboot, they're going to reboot their machine, and then that's going to help, then I'm going to have to reinfect that machine. That information is coming back. Those things that are crossing across that network, that malware is going to come back. So you have a chance to say, maybe you say at this point, if you've got your forensics team set up, when they call the help desk, you find out who the person is, what their IP address is before, and before you ask them to reboot the machine again, you go ahead and you turn on a mirroring port to start capturing information off of that machine. Have you rebooted the machine? No, I have not rebooted the machine yet. Please reboot the machine. When they reboot the machine, what happens? The evildoers doing their infection up the line at that point. You've already got the mirroring going at that point to try and capture the information and also to troubleshoot. Now that mirroring and that data that's flowing across there will tell you about that particular host from a triage standpoint, but also from an investigation standpoint, you're now collecting evidence. It may be that you also have an agent installed on that machine that you can say, okay, the machine is fully rebooted at this point. My evidence is getting stomped on. How do I stop that? Well, how do I collect that evidence? What we could do is we could get the user to turn on the capture RAM little agent, or maybe the help desk to actually execute that and pull a copy of that RAM while the machine is booting up at this moment in time. Maybe we pull several shots of the RAM as it's booting up. The help desk is going to do that triage, but maybe we can incorporate them into our incident handling. Now, there's one thing where the chain of command gets blown away. So when we talk about illegal pornography, it's for underage. It's for children. You'll notice that I will never say those two words together right in a string, CP. I won't do that because it's even dangerous on film. So here's the rule, really simply. If there's any CP involved whatsoever, all of the rules, all of the chain of command, everything that's going on in your organization stops right at that moment. Don't mess around. Stop. Don't investigate. Don't look. Don't do anything. Maintain the scene and the people around that scene and call law enforcement. The end. You direct to local law enforcement and you do not move, you do not pass go, you don't get lunch, you don't say, hey, somebody else wait here. It's, you were sitting at this computer when this thing happened, you need to stay here. I'm going to stay with you, we're going to sit here. Oh, do we need, let's have lunch brought in. Police will be here. Okay, now the rest is policy. The rest is what you decide, except for that one rule right there. The other problem that we run into in the chain of command is that, well, politics gets involved. And so if you can help it and you have enough weight within your organization, kind of force the politics out of it. Now, really what we're doing here is we're doing a risk assessment. What is the cost and the loss for this particular decision? How much are we putting at risk? What's the percentage of our organization? And sometimes you'll hear this called the value at risk. Are we willing to do this? Do you have the power to spend the money to fix it? It may be you have the power to complain about it, but you don't have the budget to fix it. Now, what you should do when you're setting up your risk assessment is do levels, or what we call pre-planned orders of magnitude. If this is only affecting 1% of the company's revenues over a year, then these people can make a decision. If it's affecting 10%, then this other higher level can make a decision. If it's affecting more than 50% of the organization's assets, then we have to call the CEO and we have to brief them on that. So that's how you deal with the risk assessments and incorporate them into your investigation process. As you escalate internally you also realize that you're escalating for a business reason. Now, should you buy this or should you build this? Should you get somebody else to take care of this for you? And it might be a good idea to have on call, instead of setting up your own forensics team, to have somebody on call. What I do for a lot of my customers, by the way, is I actually give them that RAM stick, and this RAM stick, well, actually you can insert it into a machine, and what it will do is it will cough up all of the RAM from the machine into the USB drive so I can get a quick little snapshot. There's also another facility out there where you can actually insert a USB communicator with this particular machine, and then on your local area network you'll have another machine that will light up that is specifically dedicated as a forensics investigation tool that is talking back and forth. And this is an FTK tool that they have in place. That's from Access Data. They actually have this set up. We'll talk about that later. What's our contract? What's our service level agreement with Dean or with our other agency? What kind of staff, location, and equipment can we acquire here? And it may be that we have one centralized team with local collection agents, local photographers, those kinds of things, and we direct that other resource on the fly. I know when I talked to Ed Scotus, one of the first things that he said was, be prepared. He said, I actually have clients that right there is my jump bag, and literally he carried it with him at all times. It was his entire forensics kit with him at all times when he was in the classroom, and if a customer were to call him with the top priority problem that they were coming into, he could literally pause the class at that moment in time, bring in a second instructor, get on a plane, and take off. Now, that was a really expensive thing because a private jet would have to come pick him up and take him to that location, and he'd actually be in the middle of a class teaching a couple of hundred people. But you know what? If they needed it, they got it from him. So, what do you have locally? What do you hire for yourself? Okay, so what's your methodology here? Well, you've collected up all this information, and you say, based on this information that I've collected, well, should I prosecute or not? I mean, that's the first thing that we're going to do. And then we're going to set these guidelines and follow those guidelines consistently. We will always prosecute this thing. We will not prosecute this thing. Now, it's going to be very difficult to develop. This is going to take time. You're going to have to work within your means and in your budget and the people that you're working with. And there's going to be tons and tons of variables in the forensics case itself, but be ready for those variables and say, okay, we'll generally go in this area and we'll allow our forensics expert, based on this scope, to take these actions here. Then what you're going to do is you're going to follow up the documented process and then look at the prevailing wisdom within the organization and also externally. Because forensics is changing very, very quickly, and it may be today we should never unplug the machine, and tomorrow we say, hey, we have to unplug the machine. That talks about our methodology, and it brings it all together. We take all those facts together, and that gives us a strategy for executing forensics within our organization.